The battlefield shimmered under the pale light of a distant star, its jagged terrain riddled with smoldering craters and the skeletal remains of combatants from a dozen species. Commander Zithrax of the Krelshar Confederacy stood at the crest of a ridge, his towering frame encased in a glistening exoskeleton that reflected the eerie glow of plasma fire. Around him, his elite warriors, each clad in the impenetrable carapaces of their kind, moved with mechanical precision, their spiked limbs and heavy armor a testament to millions of years of evolutionary superiority. Then he saw it, a lone human, sprinting through the chaos below. Zithrax tilted his angular head, his compound eyes narrowing in confusion. The human had no visible armor, just a thin layer of metallic fabric that clung to their form like an afterthought. A nearby plasma blast sent shards of molten debris flying in every direction. Yet the human barely faltered, dodging with a fluidity that seemed more instinct than intent. "Impossible," Zithrax muttered, his voice a series of guttural clicks and hums. "How does it survive?" His adjutant, a younger Krelshar warrior named Varkal, approached cautiously, his heavy claws scraping against the rocky ground. "Perhaps it carries a shield generator, Commander?" Varkal suggested, though the uncertainty in his tone betrayed his doubt. "Watch," Zithrax ordered, gesturing with a clawed hand. Below, the human reached a fallen Krelshar soldier, the mangled remains of his armor fused with his flesh. Without hesitation, the human knelt beside the dying warrior, ignoring the bolts of plasma hissing through the air. Their bare hands, soft and unarmored, moved with practiced precision, extracting the plasma rifle from the Krelshar's shattered limbs and aiming it toward an advancing squad of enemy drones. The weapon roared, its discharge ripping through the drones in a violent cascade of sparks and twisted metal. The human's aim was unerring, their movements quick and deliberate, each shot a death sentence for their foes. "Commander," Varkal whispered, his voice tinged with unease, "they fight like they have no fear." "No," Zithrax replied, his tone heavy with realization. "They fight like they have nothing to lose." The Krelshar commander had seen humans before, but always from a distance, always under the protection of their armored vehicles or tactical shields. This was different. This was raw. The human below was not merely surviving. It was thriving in the chaos, unburdened by the weight of armor or the limitations of fear. The battle raged on, and Zithrax found himself unable to look away. The human took a glancing hit from a drone's energy bolt, the impact sending them sprawling into the dirt. Zithrax's mandibles clicked in anticipation of their demise. Yet the human rose again, smoke curling from the scorched wound on their side. They did not retreat, nor did they cry out in pain. Instead, they charged forward with renewed fury, a primal roar escaping their lips as they closed the distance to the remaining drones. Zithrax turned to Varkal. "Their physiology, explain it?" Varkal hesitated. "Their bodies are soft, lacking the exoskeletal protection of our kind. But their tissues are, how do I say this, redundant. They have multiple layers of flesh and a peculiar system of internal repair. Wounds that would cripple us seem to hinder them only briefly." "Redundant," Zithrax repeated, the word tasting strange in his maw. "And yet they lack any natural defense." Varkal glanced down at the battlefield, where the human now stood atop a pile of drone wreckage, chest heaving as they surveyed the carnage. "Perhaps their lack of defense is their greatest strength. They adapt, Commander. They endure." The ground beneath their feet trembled as another explosion lit up the horizon, painting the sky in hues of red and gold. A second human emerged from the haze, this one wielding a crude-looking blade made of reinforced alloys. They joined the first human without a word, their movements synchronized as they prepared for the next wave of attackers. Zithrax's claws flexed involuntarily. He could not fathom such resilience, such recklessness. The Krelshar had spent eons perfecting their armor, layering it thicker and harder with each generation. They were unmatched in defense, unyielding in their strategy. Yet here were these creatures, soft, fragile, and exposed, who seemed to defy every rule of survival. "What drives them?" Zithrax asked aloud, though the question was more to himself than to Varkle. Perhaps it is their fragility that drives them, Varkle suggested cautiously. When one lives on the edge of destruction, perhaps every moment becomes a fight to exist. The commander remained silent, his gaze fixed on the humans below. One of them was laughing now, their voice carrying over the din of battle. It was a sound Zithrax had never associated with war. Raw, unrestrained joy. "They are maddening," Zithrax muttered, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "And unstoppable," Varkle added. The human duo began to retreat toward a makeshift barricade, where other members of their species were rallying. Zithrax watched as they moved together, their unarmored forms cutting through the smoke like shadows. He felt a pang of something unfamiliar. Respect, perhaps, or even envy. "They fight without armor," Zithrax said finally, his voice low and contemplative. "Because they don't need it." Varkle tilted his head, his compound eyes reflecting the fading light of the battlefield. "Shall we join them, Commander?" Zithrax did not answer immediately. Instead, he continued to watch as the humans regrouped, their voices rising in camaraderie despite their injuries and losses. It was a sight he could not fully understand, yet it stirred something deep within his ancient soul. "Yes," he said at last, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that would alter the course of his species. "We shall fight alongside them, and we shall learn what it means to endure." As the two Krelshar descended the ridge, the battle raging around them, Zithrax felt the first stirrings of something long buried in his kind: hope. For if these fragile beings could defy annihilation, perhaps there was something yet to learn about strength, not in armor but in spirit. The air was thick with the acrid scent of alien flora and the faint metallic tang of dust storms. They had landed on Varys 4 just 2 days earlier, their mission clear: secure a forward position against the advancing Onyx Dominion, a ruthless empire that sought to consume every star system it touched. The Krelshar were stalwart in their defense, their armored forms naturally suited for the planet's harsh conditions. The humans, by contrast, appeared woefully unprepared, mere intruders in a hostile world. Yet, as Commander Zithrax observed them now, he wondered if perhaps the planet itself had underestimated them. The human leader, a woman named Captain Marin Voss, stood at the center of the encampment. Her presence was magnetic, not because of her size or appearance. She was shorter than most of her kind, her unarmored frame almost laughably delicate, but because of the force she exuded. She was issuing orders, her voice sharp and unwavering, directing her soldiers with a confidence that defied their tenuous situation. Zithrax approached cautiously, his massive frame casting a shadow over her. "Captain Voss," he began, his voice a low rumble. "Your people, how do they endure? This planet is toxic, its winds abrasive, its terrain hostile. You lack the protection of armor, yet you persist as if the elements are irrelevant." Marin turned to him, her eyes bright with intensity. "You assume armor is the only way to survive. It isn't. It never has been." She gestured around the camp, where her soldiers were fortifying positions using scrap metal, fabric, and even pieces of alien vegetation. "We don't rely on the world to protect us. We adapt to it." Zithrax observed the scene with growing curiosity. A young human engineer was welding together a makeshift barricade, their hands steady despite the harsh wind buffeting the camp. Nearby, another soldier was tending to an injured comrade, their medical kit as sparse as their armor, yet their determination unwavering. "You humans speak of adaptation as if it is a weapon," Zithrax remarked, his mandibles clicking softly. "It is," Marin replied, her tone matter-of-fact. "Armor can break. Shields can fail. But adaptability is infinite. It's what's kept us alive since the beginning." Zithrax tilted his head, intrigued. "Explain?" Marin's lips quirked in a faint smile. "Our ancestors didn't have claws or fangs. No natural armor to shield them from predators. All we had were our wits and the drive to survive. When the cold came, we made fire. When the predators grew stronger, we built weapons. When the environment turned against us, we turned it into an ally. That's why we're still here. And that's why we'll win." Her words carried a conviction Zithrax could not ignore. It was not boastful, nor was it born of arrogance. It was the quiet confidence of someone who had faced the abyss and learned to thrive within it. The camp was abruptly shaken by a distant rumble, followed by the high-pitched screech of incoming artillery fire. Marin's soldiers sprang into action, their movements precise and coordinated despite the chaos. Zithrax felt the familiar pang of instinctive tension, his claws flexing as he prepared for the inevitable. "Positions!" Marin barked, her voice cutting through the din. Zithrax moved toward her, his armored frame a stark contrast to her unprotected one. "We should retreat to a fortified location," he urged. "Your soldiers are exposed." "Retreat?" Marin shot him a sharp look. "We're not here to survive. We're here to win." Before Zithrax could respond, the first wave of Onyx Dominion drones descended upon them, their sleek black forms slicing through the dust-filled air. The drones fired in rapid succession, their plasma rounds scarring the ground and tearing through the flimsy barricades. Zithrax surged forward, his claws ripping through an approaching drone with practiced ease. Beside him, Marin moved like a phantom, her compact rifle spitting bursts of fire that found their mark with uncanny precision. She fought with an economy of motion, each movement deliberate and efficient. As the battle raged, Zithrax began to notice something peculiar. The humans were not merely holding their ground. They were outmaneuvering the drones, exploiting every weakness in their enemy's formation. A group of soldiers used the terrain to funnel the drones into a choke point, where they destroyed them with improvised explosives. Another team lured a larger drone into a trap, its bulk collapsing under the weight of a camouflaged net woven from alien vines. Amid the chaos, Marin's voice rang out again. "Fall back to the ridge. Use the high ground." Zithrax followed her gaze and realized her strategy. The ridge offered a vantage point, but it was also treacherous, its surface uneven and prone to crumbling. To the Krelshar, it would be a death trap. Yet the humans moved with confidence, their unarmored forms navigating the unstable terrain as if it were second nature. When the last drone fell, the camp was eerily silent save for the rasping breaths of the survivors. Marin stood at the edge of the ridge, surveying the battlefield with a grim expression. Zithrax joined her, his carapace streaked with scorch marks. "You risk much," he said, his voice heavy with both admiration and concern. "Your soldiers fight as though their own lives are secondary." "They aren't secondary," Marin replied, her gaze steady. "But we know what's at stake. Every fight is a choice. Give up or keep going. And humans don't give up." Zithrax considered her words, the weight of them settling into the core of his being. He had always believed strength was measured in durability, in the ability to withstand force without breaking. Yet here were these fragile beings, unarmored and exposed, who seemed to embody a different kind of strength altogether. As the humans began to regroup and tend to their wounded, Zithrax turned to Marin. "Perhaps there is more to survival than armor. Perhaps," she said with a faint smile. "But survival isn't enough. Thriving, that's the real goal." Zithrax stared out at the horizon, where the glow of the Onyx Dominion's forces loomed like a storm cloud. For the first time in his long life, he felt the stirrings of something he could not name, a belief, perhaps, that there was more to strength than he had ever understood. And as the winds howled around them, carrying the scent of battle yet to come, he knew one thing for certain. He would stand with the humans, not because they needed him, but because he needed to understand them. The darkness of space was alive with fire. The Onyx Dominion's fleet loomed, its warships blotting out the stars as they rained destruction on the surface of Varys IV. Explosions rippled across the barren plains, the impact waves reaching even the ridge where the Allied forces had taken their stand. Commander Zithrax stood among the Krelshar and human soldiers, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "We are overrun," he growled, his voice carrying over the cacophony. "The Dominion's numbers are beyond calculation. We cannot hold this position." Captain Marin Voss, standing just beyond him, adjusted the earpiece connected to her command unit. Her face was streaked with soot, a deep cut on her temple still oozing blood. Yet her eyes burned with unyielding resolve. "We don't have to hold it," she said firmly. "We just have to make them think we will." Zithrax turned to her, incredulous. "You speak in riddles? Their forces are relentless. Their ships are impenetrable. And that's exactly why they think we'll break," Marin replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. She gestured to a cluster of human engineers who were frantically wiring together a series of strange devices at the base of the ridge. "But they don't understand us. They don't know what we're willing to sacrifice." Before Zithrax could question her further, a deafening roar split the air as a Dominion dreadnought descended through the atmosphere, its massive bulk casting a shadow over the battlefield. The ground beneath them quaked as the ship's energy cannons swiveled toward the ridge. "Fall back!" Marin barked to her troops. "Evacuate the wounded. Engineers, status update." A young soldier sprinted toward her, his voice barely audible over the din. "The charges are set, Captain, but we need more time to calibrate the detonation sequence." "You have 5 minutes," Marin snapped, her gaze unwavering. "Make it happen." Zithrax loomed beside her, his armored frame tense with barely restrained energy. "You intend to destroy the ridge," he deduced, his voice a low rumble. "But the detonation will leave you exposed." Marin didn't flinch. "The ridge is a trap. They'll focus their forces here, thinking they've cornered us. Once they're in position, we take out their ground units and cripple their advance." "And the price?" Zithrax asked, his tone sharp. She met his gaze, her voice unwavering. "Whatever it takes." The first salvo from the dreadnought struck the ridge, scattering debris and sending soldiers scrambling for cover. Marin grabbed Zithrax by one of his armored limbs, pulling him into the relative safety of a shallow trench. "I don't expect you to understand," she said, her voice low but fierce. "Your people were born with protection, with strength built into your very bodies. We weren't. But that's why we fight harder, why we refuse to yield. Every second we survive is a victory." Zithrax stared at her, the weight of her words settling into the core of his being. He had fought countless battles, had led his warriors into countless storms of fire and blood. Yet never had he seen such defiance in the face of annihilation. The Dominion forces advanced, their black armored troops spilling from drop ships like a tide of death. Marin soldiers fought with desperate precision, their makeshift fortifications barely holding against the onslaught. Zithrax joined the fray, his claws tearing through the Dominion's ranks as he moved to protect the humans around him. Despite the chaos, he couldn't help but notice the difference in their movements. The humans were not merely fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. Every step backward was calculated, every maneuver designed to draw the enemy closer to the ridge. "Charges ready, Captain," the engineer's voice crackled through the comms. "We've synchronized the detonation sequence." Marin's lips pressed into a thin line. "Understood. Everyone, fall back to the extraction point." Zithrax hesitated, glancing at her. "And you?" She gave him a wry smile. "Someone has to make sure they follow us." "I'll be right behind you." The Krelshar commander's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Humans and their sacrifices," he muttered, but he obeyed her command, leading his warriors and the remaining humans toward the extraction zone. As the Allied forces retreated, Marin stayed behind, her rifle slung over one shoulder as she activated a beacon on her wrist. The device emitted a high-pitched signal that drew the Dominion troops toward her position like moths to a flame. She fired sporadically, her shots deliberate but not deadly, enough to keep them advancing without slowing their momentum. The dreadnought's cannons roared again, sending another volley of plasma fire toward the ridge. The ground beneath Marin's feet began to crack and shift, the unstable terrain threatening to collapse at any moment. Extraction point reached. Zithrax's voice came through the comms. "Detonation imminent. Captain, you must retreat now." Marin glanced at the beacon on her wrist, her expression grim. "Almost there," she muttered. A Dominion soldier lunged at her from the smoke, its blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. Marin sidestepped, driving the butt of her rifle into its helmeted head before firing a point-blank shot into its chest. The soldier fell, but more emerged from the haze, their weapons trained on her. She activated the final sequence on her beacon, her lips curling into a defiant smile. "Come and get me." The ridge exploded in a blinding flash of light and sound, the shockwave ripping through the Dominion's ranks and sending their dreadnought spiraling into the ground. The force of the blast knocked Marin off her feet, the world spinning around her as she tumbled down the rocky slope. When the dust settled, Zithrax found her among the debris, her body battered and bloodied but still breathing. He knelt beside her, his massive frame shielding her from the settling ash. "You humans," he muttered, his voice thick with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "You refuse to die, even when the universe demands it." Marin's eyes fluttered open, her lips curling into a faint smile despite the pain etched across her face. "Told you," she whispered hoarsely. "We adapt." Zithrax lifted her carefully, his armored limbs cradling her fragile form as he carried her toward the extraction point. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. And as he looked down at the battered human in his arms, he knew one thing for certain. These beings, soft and unarmored, were far stronger than he had ever imagined.